My parents went hiking 3 days ago. The search party found their GoPro still recording. It was sudden. We got a call from a nearby city's police station. Our uncle, who was taking care of me and my sister while our parents were away, answered the phone. We were confused as to why our uncle was crying until we learned the news. Our parents were found dead over 11 miles away from where they had started hiking over 3 days ago. I was horrified. I felt as if my world had just splintered into nothing, and my sister just fell to the floor while I just sat there, blank face and warm tears running down my cheeks. The sheriff was obligated to ask us where we wanted the funeral and other questions. Thankfully, my uncle pulled himself together and scheduled his own brother's and sister-in-law's funeral all by himself. The weeks flew by as the weekend was over and I was left in a well of grief, still processing all that had recently happened. Eventually, we got another call telling us that another piece of evidence had been found. We initially dismissed it until they told us that it belonged to our parents. As they told us, the more intrigued we were, until my uncle decided to drive us all down there. After all of us at least wanted to see their faces one more time, since mysteriously the funeral was closed casket. Once we got there, we waited in the waiting room until a man guided us in. They said they had not yet reviewed the footage, and that when they found it, it was covered in blood and still recording even though it was clearly damaged. Finally, we got to a room where they were ready to play the footage, and all of us took a seat before the man who let us in started the video. At first, it was just my parents walking. We fast forwarded, more walking, some fishing, picking up sticks and skipping rocks. I was simply happy to see my parents again, even if it was just a recording. We went to the next video. My parents were just walking, but looked noticeably tired and anxious. Eventually, while they were resting, my mother broke the silence. "Did you hear any of that last night?" My father responded. "Yeah, it sounded so odd, like it was directly in my ear, but also near a mile away." She gave him an agreeing nod. Eventually, they kept walking, not breaking the silence until they camped. "Do you think it will happen again?" my mother asked. My father responded, "It had to have been just some animal. No creature would follow us that far just to make some noises and do not anything to us." "But what if—" my mother was cut off. "Just trust me. We'll leave tomorrow and forget any of this happened." My father tried to reassure her. It worked and they went to bed. On the third day though, something was off. My mother no longer had her bright energy accompanying her, and my father seemed to be suffering from some sleep deprivation. It felt as though my parents were just husks of their former selves, and more ominous than that, there was a strange, faint background noise constantly playing for the first 3 hours. Then it just stopped. My parents looked around and seemed to sigh and become way more relaxed. Then they stopped for a food break at a small creek. It seemed good until that noise started back up, way louder than before. This caused noticeable dread in my parents as the fear in their eyes was visible. They both ran away, leaving all their food behind as the noise kept getting louder. Eventually, my mother tripped and her bone-chilling screams could be heard in the background as the noise seemed to stop with her. After 2 hours of non-stop running, my father ended up at our house's backyard. I heard him sobbing uncontrollably. He was a mess just by the audio. He started to get it together and approach our house until the light around him seemed to wash away, like fresh paint in reaction to water. We sat there watching this overwhelming silence and darkness until it was broken by a faint sound. It got louder and louder until it felt like my eardrums were about to pop. My father appeared back in the woods, but he was not alone. As he turned, a part of the scream seemed to warp and glitch out. My father looked at it and started screaming as the thing approached him in the blink of an eye. My father seemed to be screaming as something was inserted into his mouth. Then it stopped when the snapping of his bones was heard. The GoPro fell onto the ground and it filmed my father floating over the glitching part of the screen. Then both of them just seemed to phase out of focus and into nothingness. I was in shock by what I saw, and so was everyone else in the room with me. My sister was pale and my uncle looked completely petrified. Finally, the police escorted us out. The drive home was silent and we all seemed to not to dare to speak a word, because in the silence, we all heard it. That faint sound of the thing that killed my parents slowly approaching.